He is and always will be. This is Father Demetrius Nikolodakis from St. Matthew's Greek Orthodox Church in Blandon, Pennsylvania, just outside of Reading. And I wanted to take a few minutes to share with you some thoughts about the Feast of St. Nicholas and who St. Nicholas is and how he fits into all this during the Christmas fast. And that's why I thought maybe this background would be, somewhat appropriate. Christmas stockings, the tree, kind of a tree lit up behind me. On the mantle is an icon of Mary, Joseph, and Christ as a child, which is the centerpiece, actually, of everything. But I did want to talk about St. Nicholas because he's such a prominent figure in the Eastern Christian world in that way. So I just want to take a few minutes to reflect on some things about his life and his impact in the life of the Church. Apparently, he was born around the year 270, came from very pious Christian parents. We don't have any story of a real conversion experience as such, but some of the documents from this time can be a little sparse in that way, and so forth. So we assume it was Christian parents. Somewhere along the way, he knew Christ. There's a tradition that his parents died when he was very young, and he went to live with a very wealthy aunt. As he grew in his relationship with the Lord, he desired the monastic life, a life of prayer, contemplation, and so forth, and went off actually to the Holy Land, to Palestine, even to Jerusalem, seeking it out. But after a while, he apparently came across that the Lord was not wanting him to stay there. He grew up in what's now modern Turkey, Asia Minor, and I think it's important to understand that he was directed by the Lord to go to Myra. When he got back, apparently, his wealthy aunt had died and left him a lot of money, left him her wealth. And he began giving it to the poor and the destitute. You know the famous story, which may have happened after he was made a bishop, but rescuing the three daughters from prostitution by throwing money 3 different times into the window of the homes, so the father, who was poor, could have money for a dowry in order to marry his daughters off, which was a big deal back then, to have a dowry, and so forth. But anyway, sorry, I have with a couple of cats. This is what happens when you're recording from home. They're kind of scampering around. Anyway, he was made bishop around the year 300. Like I said, he was very pious, very much an ascetic. Plump Santa Claus is not really the reality that we know. There's some legendary embellishments about him as a child, fasting on Wednesdays and Fridays, even as an infant, not nursing from his mother. But I think those embellishments are to point to how really his approach to prayer and fasting, his discipline of the spiritual life, was a very real, natural part of who he was in that way. Like I said, he was made bishop around the year 300. In the year 303, a new edict of persecution was instituted by the Emperor Diocletian, and very severe. The last biggest persecution by the Roman Empire at the time. It was always a capital offense since the year 64 to be a follower of Jesus. But there were periods when they would deliberately go to ferret Christians out, and then some periods where there was kind of a lull where the advice of the Emperor Trajan to his one governor Pliny in the year 110 was, you don't have to ferret them out, but if you run across them, yes, arrest them and try to convince them to renounce Christ, and if they don't, execute them. But the year 303 was a major financial depression in the Roman Empire. Christians used to joke, Tertullian has a really big joke about this, about every time something bad happened in the empire, they would blame the Christians because they didn't worship the gods of the empire. I think this is very important to understand. Atheism was against the law in the Roman Empire, and that meant worshiping the gods that the state recognized, plus also the emperor or the preceding emperor who was declared a god, and the state itself being in a sense divine. In the course of that persecution that began in the year 303, Nicholas apparently was arrested and tortured and became known as a confessor. Apparently he didn't get arrested until much later because he survived his prison time and was released when Constantine won the Battle of the Milvian Bridge in the year 311, and the Edict of Toleration was issued in the year 312, which made Christianity a recognized religion of the Roman Empire. So Nicholas was able to function as a bishop. He was highly respected. Christian bishops were in general respected, so much so that when it came to mediating differences, rather than go to the magistrates, even non-Christian Roman citizens would go to Christian bishops to help them settle their differences, even in the sense of civil suits and things like that. They were known and had the respect of the people and even of a lot of the magistrates themselves. Nicholas, there's a story about him stopping an execution of 3 soldiers because it was found to be that they were later wrongly accused and they were in fact innocent and exonerated. Stories abound with Nicholas praying for people, healings taking place. And one thing he became known for was the idea of praying for like things, the weather, if it was very horrific, especially storms, and they were near, being near the sea, calming those storms down and so on and so forth. He was very much known for that. So he was also, of course, known for his generosity in that way. We know about that. It wasn't just during the quote-unquote Christmas season. This was a standard way of understanding the role of a pastor among the Christians. And not only the role of the pastor, but in turn, the reality of how the church was to be in the world, how sharing with those who were in great need, sharing of resources, both physical as well as spiritual and so forth. So I think Nicholas reflects his community in a very real way, not just him as a saint and as a holy man and as a pastor, but as a reflection of his community. And really what St. Nicholas is known for is not just the fact of generosity. That was a kind of a common thing. St. Nicholas, has been brought from Western Europe and later developed in the 19th century into the guise of Santa Claus. Interestingly, in Greece, though, Santa Claus is not St. Nicholas, but he's St. Basil, who is also known for his generosity, established hospitals, orphanages, and so on and so forth, as well as Raham, theologian. So the idea of what a bishop is, and in turn what a pastor is, and in turn what the community that the pastor reflects, the father of the community reflects in terms of his family, meaning the local Eucharistic community, is very much what St. Nicholas models. And it's a challenge for us. How are we as communities? Are we known? God told Abraham that he's going to create a people, community from them, and a community through which he was going to bless the world. And every great saint, every of the the great bishops, pastors, and so on and so forth in the history of the church were known for the fact that they were trying to be a blessing to those around them, but also that the church that they pastored was to be a blessing to the world around them. And of course, that's a challenge for us, for each parish. Is the presence of our parishes, each one of us, is that a blessing to the world around us? And not just because we provide exotic ethnic foods that people buy, or go once in a while to a homeless shelter, etc. But is our presence, does it make a difference in the community that we live in that way? And St. Nicholas definitely reflects that. The gospel reading for the Feast of St. Nicholas is Luke's version of the Beatitudes. And I'm just going to read them here real quick. It's only a few verses. It's in Luke chapter 6, starting with verse 20. Blessed are you who are poor, for yours is the kingdom of God. Blessed are you who are hungry now, for you will be filled. Blessed are you who weep now, for you will laugh. Blessed are you when people hate you, and when they exclude you, revile you, defame you on account of the Son of Man. Rejoice in that day and leap for joy, for surely your reward is great in heaven. For that is what their ancestors did to the prophets. And St. Nicholas lived all that. He lived that. He was going to be a blessing to the poor because he saw in them the reality of the incarnation, that the image of God in each person, the face of Christ through the incarnation, especially welded to each human being, no matter how high or low, rich or poor, good or bad, that God had welded himself to every human being. Those who were hungry on the levels of physical, yes, spiritual, every other way. For you will be filled. And who was the one through whom God was going to do that? Well, it was the people that would partner with God in order to work on God's project. That's what it meant to be a Christian, not simply somebody passively waiting to die and go to live in an immortal life, quote unquote. But that how we live now, do we reflect being partners with Christ, his apprentices, being trained by him. Blessed are you who weep now, for you will laugh. The joy that is running undercurrent of everything that we think is so bad, but God is present there with his healing peace, his joy, that we can have a taste of. Yes, it doesn't mean everything's going to be the way we would like it to be right now, but there is that reality that's present and embodied in the person of Jesus himself. So, as I mentioned before, Santa Claus is the Western kind of development of St. Nicholas. And, the reality of how this heart of generosity is translated and lived out. But to be lived out as in the church, not just as simply a nice story for children. I think it's important to understand something about this too. That Santa Claus jumping around all over the place, that's nothing compared to the idea of the communion of saints. That for Orthodox Christians and those of the apostolic tradition understand that the heaven and earth intersect, they overlap, they're not separate spheres of existence. God fills everything. There is no place that God is not present and existing. He's there in every place and time. But especially in Christ, because already you have this reality even in the Old Testament, the Hebrew scriptures, that heaven and earth intersect. Angels ascend and descend on the ladder from heaven to earth. There's constant interaction, interfacing, as we see in the scriptures. But all the more in the person of Jesus himself, Jesus embodies that overlap, that interconnection between heaven and earth, the divine and the human in his own self. And we see that in the great story in Matthew, in Luke, of the Transfiguration. Luke's version of the Transfiguration is very potent because he talks about, like as does Matthew and Mark, this idea that heaven and earth overlap, and Jesus takes 3 disciples and goes up to the mountain to pray, and so forth. But as he does this, they fall asleep, and suddenly they wake up to see Jesus brighter than light and 2 people talking with them. 2 people talking with them. And the 2 people are Moses and Elijah. They're talking with Christ. And Luke goes so far as to highlight what they were speaking of. And it says, Moses and Elijah talking with him appeared in glory and were speaking of his departure, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. Now, this is interesting. So Moses and Elijah, who've quote unquote passed away, they're in another dimension. They're not in the dimension of earth, technically. But here they are, and even seen by Peter, James, and John. And they're interfacing with Jesus in front of Peter, James, on this planet. So the idea that those who've gone ahead of us into the presence of the Lord are still, in a sense, present and active is a very real thing. We see that in the stories that it's when people, die, they're not asleep. They're not in suspended animation. They are, in fact, very alert. They're very conscious and cognizant, and so forth. The book of Revelation talks about the saints, chapter 6, under the altar, praying, calling upon the Lord, and they are praying. They're asking him how long he's going to wait, and so forth. And other places where in Revelation, like chapter 6, 5 and chapter 8, where they talk about the prayers of the saints. Which ones are those? The saints in heaven as well as on earth, mixing with the incense of the angels in heaven, the incense that symbolizes the prayers of the saints up before the throne of God. So they're praying, they're connecting with God even now, even before the appearance of Christ, the parousia, which will take place. So the idea that the saints would kind of still be available, St. Nicholas doesn't need a sleigh and reindeer to get around. And the idea that his ministry would continue after his physical time on earth was over is not an unusual thought. That again, that partnership to minister with Christ goes on even in the next dimension. So it kind of takes away from the idea that heaven will be sitting around on clouds and eating fruit and just having a relaxed time doing nothing. The idea that this reality takes place with St. Nicholas. We know he was at the First Ecumenical Council, and I think that's very important to take into account. First Ecumenical Council was about affirming the reality of Jesus being fully divine as well as fully human. The idea that he wasn't just less than God, or like God with a small g, but he was everything that God was, because God, the Father, shares all of who he is, his divinity, his omnipotence, his power, his glory, his everything with the Son that's existed with him since the beginning in that way. And Nicholas was a bishop there affirming that reality and obviously teaching that reality. And if we take this back to the Santa Claus thing, the idea that it really is about Christ. It's not just about being morally good and nice, not necessarily bad things, but it is about Christ. It is about Christ. Nicholas would go on and live after the First Council, passed away in the next decade afterwards, and so forth, and was known just again as an incredibly humble and generous bishop in that way. Again, but very much an icon of what the pastoring, the episcopate, the priesthood was really about. That whole reality that's found in Jesus Christ, and is a reflection directly of Christ himself. And many people have realized that even the Santa Claus thing is kind of a takeoff on Christ, just like the way the Superman story about, the son of somebody coming to this planet to help this planet, etc., is a mythological extension of trying to understand the story of Christ and putting it into a different genre, if you will. There's some aspects of that, but I want to read something here that I liked, and it was tied to a picture of Santa Claus kneeling at the manger, at the feeding trough of Jesus in that way. And he's praying. And his prayer is, "My dear, precious Jesus, I did not mean to take your place. I only bring toys and things, and you bring love and grace. People can give me lists of wishes and hope that they came true, but you hear prayers of the heart and promise your will to do. Children try to be good, not cry when I am coming to town, but you love them unconditionally, and that love will abound. I leave only a bag of toys and a temporary joy for a season, but you leave a heart of love, full of purpose and reasons. I have a lot of believers and what one might call fame, but I never heal the blind or tried to help the lame. I have rosy cheeks and a voice full of laughter, but no nail-scarred hands or a promise of the hereafter. You may find several of me in a town or at a mall, but there is only one omnipotent you to answer a sinner's call. And so, my dear precious Jesus, I kneel here to pray, to worship and adore you on this, your birthday. And is that something that we teach to our families, to those of us who have children, that this is the center, the reality of it all? St. Nicholas didn't see Jesus as a part of some holiday. He saw his life as trying to fit into the life of Christ, to be framed by and partnering with the love of Christ himself in the presence of Christ. I think it's important to understand this reality that, again, heaven and earth intersect, and there's a back and forth. Stories abound of St. Nicholas coming, being sent by the Lord to, like the way angels are sent to help people, to be there for them. Is so prevalent in the Orthodox Church. My father himself experienced something in his village when he was little. There was a little church named after St. Nicholas in his village, and it was under repair because there was parts of the roof that were problematic. So they closed it up and didn't use it for services, lest something be going on in the church and, part of the building start falling apart. But anyway, true to some of the children, that we know it can be mischievous, 3 of his friends climbed up a scaffolding and were playing around on the roof. And suddenly, out of nowhere, you have to understand what my father told me was there was a clearing all around the church. There were no trees or brush or anything, a pretty open area. And suddenly, out of nowhere, as they're up on the roof goofing around, a priest, as the kids thought, they thought it was the priest, an old man with a white beard looks up at them and he says, "Get down from there, kids. That part of the roof is dangerous. If you go like 1 meter, about 3 feet over that way, you'll be hurt. So please climb down." And he was kind of stern, but so for the heck of it, one of the kids took one of the tiles, roofing tiles, and he tossed it over in that direction. And suddenly, that area, that part of the roof, just caved in into the church. They looked around after their shock, and they suddenly realized the quote priest was gone. Anyway, people from around the area in that part of the village came running because they heard the noise when that part of the roof caved in. And they got to the church, and the kids were safe, thank God. And they opened up the church to see what damage had been done. And the kids kept talking about this priest who had warned them. And they said, "There's no priest. We haven't had a priest in a while because it's closed for repairs, and the diocese, we've been going to another church, etc. In the meantime, till the repairs are complete. What priest are you talking about?" Anyway, as they were viewing the damage within, suddenly the kids started hollering, and they said, "Here's the priest." And the people walked over, and the 3 boys were pointing to an icon of St. Nicholas. These stories abound through time and space, and St. Nicholas being the protector of sailors, a lover of children, but a lover of those who are in great need, a lover of those who are in great need. So I think that's a very powerful testament to the fact that God, he has a plan for us that he keeps presenting himself to us. But I think to honor St. Nicholas and understand him not only as a pastor and a model of pastoring, but I think the aspect of who he is and how does he mirror not only what it means to be a pastor, but what it means to be a parish, an Eucharistic community, a people who are thankful for the presence of God and are so filled with that reality that they want to share him with the world around them. I think it's really an important thing to keep in mind. And it should be a cheer of his saints in and among us, both in court, who wrote a wonderful book about his very difficult and very much a reflection of the whole Irish culture. And it was before he passed away, he was being interviewed about St. Patrick's Day. And to be Irish, green beer, Chicago, they put green dye in the canals in the city, whoopee, big parades, just party time. And McCourt was asked, what would St. Patrick, if he saw the celebrations today, what would he want? And he made an interesting comment. He said, St. Patrick would actually say, stop all the crazy celebrations, pray, go feed the poor, take care of those who are in need, and preach the gospel. Bless all of us this season. All of us, not just in clergy, but in all of us, and especially our communities. May St. Nicholas's prayers be a blessing to us. God bless you during this Christmas Advent fast. And may we be a blessing to him by the way we love him and each other. The grace of the Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God,